The flow state is not a continuous state. It's a state of comfort and peace and joy, feeling that I wish this could go on forever, but it doesn't. Nothing goes on forever.
How does that translate into happiness for you?
I'm in flow in the sense that I have so much expertise, experience, ability now after these so many years, 22 years in practice and 15 years of training before that. The work is easy, but it's work.
Today, I am in the Northeast and I'm sitting down with a dear friend of mine, Dr. John Chuback.
There's a great expression that says, you don't get to choose which way the wind blows, but you do get to set your own sail. God willing, you find the thing that you enjoy. Even if you're struggling, you enjoy the process, then it's easier to feel the flow more frequently, even when you're struggling.
I think that we could all take a lesson from what you just said and learn how to do the thing, but also wrap this around continual learning about how to be a really good communicator with the people around you. So everybody, thanks for coming back and checking out these short films. It's good to be here. Today, I am in the Northeast and I'm sitting down with a dear friend of mine, Dr. John Chuback, and I've known John for 15 years plus, I don't even know, maybe it was like 2007 or 8 or something.
Close to 20, I'd say.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's back to the same old. How do we learn from each other? All these experiences that we share together, and even when you're working with somebody, what are we learning from these folks, right? And in my experience, as you know, working with MDs throughout the nation for the last 17 years, I've learned a thing or two. And beyond the practice is designed to get to know these folks beyond the medical world. Yes, it's important that we understand why they're doing medicine and the empathy behind medicine, the compassion behind medicine, the science behind medicine. I think that's all important. But as you know, these individuals could share more than being in an OR. So first of all, John, thanks for being here with me.
It's a pleasure, Vic. Always good to see you.
Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. What's that make you think about?
Yeah, well, you know, it's a journey. It reminds me of the great old lyric, how many roads must a man walk down before you can call him a man? I think a fully realized, fully actualized individual, you have to do the thing. I mean, no matter what your profession is, no matter your vocation or your avocation, you've got to be involved. You've got to do the thing. You can't, I know some of Vic's pastimes and passions, you can't imagine you're a surfer. I mean, eventually you have to get out and you have to, you know, paddle out and you have to try to catch some waves. You have to try to get up on the board and
do the thing.
And you have to do the thing. So without doing the thing, there's no growth, there's no progress. And you've got to have a few wounds. You've got to have a few scrapes and a few bumps, and that stuff heals with time and becomes kind of calloused. And then walking down enough roads, you develop a suit of armor, which gives you the strength to keep going.
Yeah, and in that context, you know, keeping it to the mighty Stoics, right? Like, the obstacle is the way. Back in college days as a bartender, and how I have come to learn working with medical professionals, how you guys are a lot like bartenders. And what I mean to say with that is that you connect with just about every kind of human being, like a bartender connects with every kind of human being, and how you can learn from people, right? And in medicine, like, you go into this approach of like having this North Star that says, I'm going to go help people and I'm going to go do the thing. Looking back at that, you know, like, what are some learnings? Because I mean, yes, you've got some years into this, and you know, I would imagine like you've seen the patterns of humanity, and we all try to absorb what's happening out here in the world and all these changes. And some of us are lucky to be parents and we raise kids in society, and we are professional and we do our best to learn and create services and products that, you know, people are going to pay attention to. But if you reflect back at, you know, the last 20 years per se, top 3 things, you know, that give you that mental peace, that make you want to get up and go to work and still bartend to the masses.
First of all, I think we as physicians, I'm not sure that all of us connect with so many types of people. You use that word, and I know how you're using it, don't get me wrong, but it's more that we interact with or intersect with. I think the best physicians can find a way of connecting with people from all different walks of life, different ages, and different backgrounds, socioeconomic, financial, professional, et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's something I think a lot about, Vic. You ask a really good question. What drives me personally to keep doing the things that I do, not just in medicine, but other professional interests?
You're an entrepreneur. You're an author, you're an entrepreneur, you're in medicine. How do you parlay that and find the avenues, right?
Yeah, it's even friends of mine, business partners of mine ask me, hey, where do you get the drive? Where do you get the ambition? I have to tell you, I think some of it is innate. You know, we each have our own character, our own persona. My father used to tell a great story. He sort of a parable. He would say, if you take a lemon tree and you plant it in the Garden of Eden and you only water it with milk and honey, when it gives fruit and you eat it, it's going to be sour because it's a lemon tree. Everyone and everything has their nature. Now, some of it is nurture, but I do believe in nature, and I think people like myself, yourself, we're kind of different than so many people in that we do have a lot of interests, we are ambitious, we are curious. I think curiosity is one of the best words. And one of my other favorite words is better. I always feel like things could get better, no matter where you are, whether you're doing well at that time in your life or whether you're feeling like you're near the top at that time in your life. Anyone can get better, right? Roger Federer was working on his forehand and his backhand right up until the time he retired. And Pavarotti was doing his vocal exercises every morning right up until the time that he retired from the peak, you know, hitting that C note and all of those things. So some of the drive comes from within. Some of it was experiential. My father was a physician. He was a hardworking person. He was an intellect. He was intellectually curious. And so some of that rubbed off on me. But again, I go back to something we talked about a little bit earlier. By doing the thing, you get the power to do the thing. I think Emerson may have said that. At least it's been attributed to him. So in other words, you don't get tired from work. You don't get tired from study. You don't get tired from learning. Enthused by it. You get motivated by it. You get pulled in by it. And so it seems the more that I've done, whether it's in patient care, building a practice, building companies outside the practice, writing books, doing various things that I've been involved in, the more I do, the more I want to do. Do the thing and you'll have the power to do the thing. And the flip side of that is, do not the thing and you shall not have the power. I believe in this dichotomous law that they call the law of opposites, right? If this table has a top, it has to have a bottom. If it has a left, it has to have a right. Everything counts. Everything you do counts, but everything you don't do counts. If you go walk the 2 miles today for your good health, that counts. If you don't, that counts too.
So how do we fight mediocrity? How do we fight complacency? How do we establish habits? I know for me, it was one of these things that life exposed itself because of my upbringing very fast, right? So I was able to, with an inquisitive mind, when you said that earlier, I think that's the key. Like being inquisitive was always an attribute that helped me open doors in life. And then as I learned to position myself, or I learned to pull best practices from society. Maybe you have to go get this degree of, got to work hard, build the work ethic and all that kind of stuff. Like, how does one fight mediocrity? How does one fight complacency in a world full of information that makes us just want to, in a sense, it's kind of like dumbing us down?
Again, I think some of that has to come from inside, but not to be too flippant about it, but there's kind of a funny old expression that says, the reality is half the people you're going to meet in your life are below average. Right? So not everybody gets to fight mediocrity and win. Yeah. Not everybody gets to break out of the average. Another thing that I talk about quite a bit, one of my professors when I was in general surgery was a brilliant guy. He was very, very full of aphorisms and great wisdom. He used to say, only 5% of surgeons can be in the top 5%. He said, no matter how you push and shove, you can't even fit 6% in the top 5%. If somebody's outside the top 5%, he makes it or she makes it into the top 5%. somebody who was there has to get pushed backward into 6th or 7th. That has to come from an internal desire. Not everybody has it. And I'm not sure that you can teach it to everybody. I'm not sure that everybody wants to learn it. I've met plenty of people that I've tried to share this kind of philosophy with, attitude and so forth, with getting better, building on what you've got, studying, reading, learning, doing, trying. And a huge number of people are legitimately, sincerely not interested. But I don't think that that's necessarily a problem. I don't think that those of us who are wired that way have to convert those people to our way of thinking. I'm a guy, I've never run a marathon, and I can tell you right now I never will. It's just not of any, I'm certainly not built for it, but it's never been an interest of mine. I was an athlete my whole life, but I had a certain kind of athleticism and physicality and mentality that I found my place in the sports world. Left tackle on the football team, crease defense on the lacrosse team. I wasn't built for long distance endurance running. So that's just an example, a physical manifestation that nobody's going to convert me to become, a high endurance athlete. I'm more of an explosive power kind of person. So we all find our way. If the other individual is truly happy in the middle somewhere, good for them. Now, you'd hate to think that somebody's happy at the bottom, but there are those people too. They feel more comfortable being in the shadows, being in the background, or not being seen at all. And then it leaves place for other people who want to kind of be the star of the show. And
there's still a lane to lead by example. I mean, one can say also, to super generalize it, we're biologically born into the world a certain way. Our neurons are connected, whether that's through DNA, the science says, whether we have cancer in our cells or not. And then the environmental, the sociological effects, the stories that happen to our lives. And trauma happens, right? And everybody has these kind of stories. And some people don't have the mechanisms, the tools, the guidance, the mentors to pull them from those kind of situations. I know I had coaches. I look at coaches and I look at friendships, I look at individuals that come into the seasons of my life, and I say, well, there's a light there that I want to learn from, and I think it's a matter of being able to learn from these human beings. Every story, every experience is in a book. That's why I love reading books. I think that I got lucky because along the way I was able to kind of see these types of individuals. And why I continue to do this kind of stuff is because I can learn from this. Not only that, I'm having a great time doing this. It's part of what I do. Looking back at this, the undeniable truth that, we're all going to expire at some point. And I am happy with that as well. I live in a world that I understand that the program of life of society and the age that I live in, that I was born into, operates a certain way. So self-awareness is a big component of how I walk, my days and walk forward. I don't have it figured out, but I understand that if I ask questions and I continue to ask questions and I live authentically, that, my life will guide me towards the right path, and I'll continue to paddle out and continue to surf the wave of life. As long as I think I heard Eddie Vedder say this once, right? Like, life is a wave. You could have fun as the wave is going. You could see where it's gonna, line up over there. Just keep having fun. Just don't take your eye off the wave, because wave is life and she will pummel you. It's not who gets up from that wave and paddles back out. And that's just it. This makes me think of this quote from Epictetus, right? And it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Ain't that the truth? Like, how much of all of this is mindset? That's the whole thing. It's, what happens to us happens to just about everyone. Everybody's had their heart broken. Everybody's, made a bad business decision. Everybody's, said something that they regretted that they wanted to take back. It's not what happens to us that matters. It's how we react to that in the long term that really matters. Experience, going through it, and being introspective to say, hey, I regret the way that I spoke to Vic that day. Now what? Do I have the courage, big word, important word, to pick up the phone and call him and say,
hey Vic, I'm sorry, I apologize. One of the great lessons, I think, in surgical education, the history and the tradition of not just the written board examination, but the oral board examination. Because in the written board examination, they ask you questions, multiple choice questions. If the patient would have this kind of cancer, which chemotherapy agent or which operation might you do? And you say A, B, C, D. That's fine to show your basic knowledge, your didactic knowledge of the subject matter. The oral examination is a totally different experience. It's not the same test being spoken. It's a different test. And that test is, Vic, you go into the emergency room and there's a 16-year-old boy with right lower quadrant pain and a fever and a white blood cell count. He's tender in the right lower quadrant and he's got rebound and rigidity and guarding and Rovsing sign.
What button do you press?
All of these things, right? And he's got an ultrasound even that shows a target sign. What do you think he's got? And you say, oh, it sounds certainly like he's got appendicitis. Well, what do you want to do? I'm going to take his appendix out. Okay, well, how are you going to do that? Right? So far, so good. This is more like the written exam. This is going well. I'm going to do a open appendectomy through a McBurney incision in the right lower quadrant. Okay, how do you do that incision, doctor? I go through the skin and subcutaneous tissue and external oblique, internal oblique, etc. I get into the abdominal space. He says, great. You're in the peritoneal cavity and you expose the appendix and it's perfectly normal.
Now what?
That's the big question in life. Now what? You say, no, you told me he had right lower quadrant pain and he had a white count and he had fever and he had guarding and he had rigidity. I mean, for God's sake, he had an ultrasound that showed appendicitis. Yeah, it turns out, they called down to the radiology department, but that wasn't his scan. That was a kid who was there earlier this afternoon. Now what? You've cut the kid open. You're in the belly. You have an incision this big over here. Now what?
Yeah.
There's no multiple choice here now.
Yeah.
And then you say, well, I would never do that. That's never happened to me. That would never happen on my doctor. I'm telling you, you're there. This is how the oral exam goes. And it's a beautiful process because you take all these very, very capable, very well-trained, very competent people, and you put them into one now what situation after another. And it gets you to think a different way. Yeah, what if that were to happen to me? What would I do? Would I extend this incision? Now, how do I extend it? I have an incision transversely or obliquely. How do I see up and down in the belly? How do I see the other side? Could I put a scope in? Now, if I put a scope in, how do I insufflate the abdomen with air if I have a hole in the belly? It gets a lot harder when you get to now what situations. It gets harder when you get, as we used to say in football practice, when you get the snot knocked out of you rather than knocking the snot out of the other guy.
Now what?
Now what? I mean, it's easy when you knock him down. You get up, you put your fists in the air and you scream and the cheerleaders jump up and down. That's easy. But what about when you can't breathe? Do you want to play anymore?
The undeniable truth of life. Now what?
Now what?
And understanding that, how do we react? Just like the quote.
Guy goes to medical school, he says, I want to be a surgeon. He goes on his surgical rotation, he sees blood, he passes out. Now what? You say, well, you'll get used to it. He comes to the operating room the next day, he sees more blood, he passes out again. Now what? Not everybody's going to be a great, cardiovascular surgeon. Not everybody's going to be a great marathoner. Not everybody's going to be, and the guy who's a great marathoner is very unlikely to also take a gold medal in the Olympic Games in the 100-yard dash.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to, I think a big part of the now what answer is you have to find that thing that resonates with you, that thing that puts you in a good vibration where you say, I feel good, I feel great here. Like this conversation that we're having, you and I have been doing this for years. Mm-hmm. We feel comfortable here.
Yeah.
I know plenty of really competent physicians and people in all kinds of walks of life. They'd rather be hung upside down by their ankles than be in front of a camera and have a talk like this.
Yeah.
So they don't have to do it. Yeah. So now what is, I'm not going to be in front of the camera. If I'm interested, I'll be behind the camera. I'll be photography, lighting, makeup, direction, production, whatever. You got to find your place. You got to find your lane where you feel comfortable and where you feel like you're in the flow.
With that word, flow state at our age, right? And kind of looking at this and saying, well, am I in flow state? We're young, we're ambitious, we go through these machines that we build because of the programs that in this conversation, how we all fall into the now what's of our lives. But for whatever reason, right or wrong, you became a doctor. Like everybody else that does what it is that they do, they question, why did I do this? Was it a family, somebody telling me that I had to do this and I got programmed that way? Was it me saying that I'm gonna do this, or did I just fall into this? If I could ask for your opinion, and advice and what you seem to have figured out a flow state that is not perfect. I'm not saying like everybody has, I think like there's a compromise in what we do and how we do this. I think life is like for those of us who are self-aware enough to understand, is one big hypothesis. And what experiments are we gonna run to help us create a feedback loop that help us? But now zooming out of this experience, we're in the year 2024, your kids are in college, you've gone through this bulk of a machine build, and you have the passions outside of being in the OR. How does that translate into happiness for you?
Well, you have to have courage.
Okay, there's that word again.
You have to have courage. You have to have courage to do something. You also have to have the courage to change course. There's a great expression that says, you don't get to choose which way the wind blows, but you do get to set your own sail. You do get to adjust the rudder. You do have control of the boat to whatever degree you've got control of the boat. And sometimes you have to sail into the wind. You don't always have the wind at your back. And the flow state is temporary. It's transient. It's fleeting. It's cruel seductress. One moment it's there, and one moment it's gone.
It's like happiness. You're really happy at one point, but mediocrity and adversity is right. So this like pendulum swing.
But that go back to the wave and Eddie Vedder. That wave, life is wave-like.
Yeah.
As a cardiac surgeon, I'm completely in tune with that. Flat line in cardiac surgery is not a good rhythm.
Nope.
That who wants a life like that? That you can't make a hell of a lot of good music with that one note. Right? Life is deep, 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 deep,
yep,
deep, deep, and the breathing goes. Right? So there's the venous waveform, there's the arterial waveform, there's the pulmonary artery capillary wedge pressure, there's the breathing waveform. But everything has a wave. And what does a wave mean? Peak and valley, peak and valley. Whether it's dramatic or whether it's subtle, life is made of these waves of peaks and valleys. It's cliche perhaps, but repetition is the mother of education. You go over it again. How could you feel happy if you didn't know what it felt like to be sad?
Exactly.
How could you be elated if you didn't know what it felt like to be depressed? That amazing sense of hunger and having a great appetite if you were always overfed. You've got to get knocked down to know how good it feels to be able to get back up. To have the courage to stand up, to have the courage to get back in, for the next play. This is the nature of things. The flow state is not a continuous state. It's a state of comfort and peace and joy and just an overall sense of well-being that, this very sort of endorphin-driven, beautiful feeling that I wish this could go on forever. But it doesn't. Nothing goes on forever. And so in the work that I do day to day as a surgeon, I'm in flow in the sense that I have so much expertise, experience, ability now after these so many years, 22 years in practice and 15 years of training before that, that the work is easy, but it's work. And there's pressure, and there are consequences, and there's decision making, and there are complications, and there are difficult patients, and there are difficult conversations. So you're not always in flow, but we have to still do our work. And when we get into that flow state, that feeling of, I wish this feeling would never end, we have to recognize it, enjoy it, and hope the ride, like a great wave, will take us all the way to the beach.
Yeah, it's well put. You made me think about something with business that I wanted to ask you. Now, having 20 plus years, like you said, in business, and having learned from these things, like top 3 secrets to a 7-figure practice versus a 6-figure practice when it comes to being successful. What comes to mind?
Well, the first one is work.
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah, you need to work. You need to work hard. The second one is ability, and that's a key term. You have to be really capable. You have to be great at what you do. You have to make your mind up, no matter what you're doing, whether it's practicing medicine, doing marketing, filmmaking, being a great interviewer, journalist, musician. You have to put the time in. You have to put the time in. It goes back to, Vic and I, we've talked about Malcolm Gladwell and the 10,000 hour rule and all of that stuff. There's no way around it. For young people, they have to understand. You need to put the time in, repetition, and practice. So, God willing, you find the thing that you enjoy. Even if you're struggling, you enjoy the process of, finger work and scales and finger picking and so on. If you're practicing Spanish guitar, classical guitar, then it's easier to feel the flow more frequently, even when you're struggling. You're by yourself on the couch at home and you're trying to get something down, and you go over it and over it and over it, and then one day it just comes. Now you're saying, hey, what are we gonna have for lunch? And it's happening over here. So that's a wonderful kind of process, but that doesn't happen automatically. You need to put the time in. So work leads to the ability. You have to put the time in, and everything is hard before it's easy. Anything of consequence is hard before it's easy. And I give young people who work with me and train with me this simple example. As a kid, you get so frustrated trying to tie your shoes or to blow a bubble or to whistle or to snap your fingers. In the learning process, you have to break everything down to the most finite mechanical element in order to understand, memorize, repeat, practice, and so forth. And then again, you get to the point, it's like, hey, wait for me, I'm coming too, right? And you tie both shoes and you're not even conscious that you've tied them. And you take it all for granted, but you forget all the hard work and the frustration as a kid. You're the only kid left in the class or in the neighborhood or whatever who can't whistle yet. It drives you crazy, but you're not going to be left out, so you try, or ride a bicycle, or ride a skateboard, or roller skate, or ice skate, or any of these things, because it's important to you. You go through the work as a child to do many of these things that we call play, because you want to fit in, because you want to enjoy it, because it looks like fun. And the same thing happens in our profession. You have to work hard to lead to that ability. And then, once you have the ability, then comes, and we've talked a lot about this over the years, a lot of those intangibles. Okay, now I've worked hard and now I can operate. But can I sit down with a person who's seen 3 other doctors and give them the confidence that they can trust me and that I'm going to take care of you like I would if you were mother, brother, father, sister? I had a very rare opportunity, which was an extraordinary experience. My mother had a lung tumor. She insisted that I do her operation. And I wanted to send her to some of my old professors where I had done thoracic at Sloan Kettering locally. Of course, I did my thoracic training at University of Rochester, which was further away, but I still knew Dr. Valerie Rush, who was the chief of thoracic surgery there. I said, Mom, Dr. Rush is world class. Go to her. She said, John, if you don't do it, I'm not having it done. For years, I had been doing open heart surgery. Actually, general thoracic surgery wasn't even my main thing. Of course, I was trained in it, but I was really more of an open heart guy, cardiac surgical guy. For years and years, I used to tell patients in the holding area, I used to say, Vic, I can't promise you today that everything is going to go well, that there won't be any problems. This is high-risk surgery. But what I can promise you is that I'm going to take care of you just like you were my mother and my father and my brother, a member of my own family. The fascinating moment came when I saw my mother in the pre-op holding area. My father was standing at her side. He was a retired obstetrician gynecologist, and I went to get the consent, which I had to do, and go through the risks and benefits. I said, I can't guarantee that everything's going to go well today, But what I can guarantee is that I'm going to take care of you the same way I have all of those other thousands of patients leading up to this moment. I didn't have to take care of her like she was my mother. I just took care of her the way I took care of all those other people, and the whole thing came full circle. So once you do the work, you become an expert, you have the skill set, then it becomes personal, then it becomes trust, then it becomes personal relationships which drive success in our professions.
Here's an oversimplification. Put your head in the books. Things will work out the way they're supposed to. Do the work. And ultimately, the grades will come, the job will turn into what you want it to be, but you have to do the work, and you got to trust yourself.
But you've got to be able to, in the end, you've got to be able to connect with people.
Of course.
They need to trust you. They need to feel comfortable. You need to be able to, and that's an area where a lot of people can probably benefit from some more work, which is connecting and communicating. Connecting and communicating.
I run into that. That's a challenge. That's like a pattern that I see with practices all over, where there's typically like a misalignment between leadership and team. And it's always coming down to miscommunications, lack of communication. And like you said earlier, some people are just not born to be good communicators. Sure, we could get better at becoming good communicators, but if we plant the flag and say, I'm going to run a business and I'm going to have a team, I think that we could all take a lesson from what you just said and learn how to do the thing, but also wrap this around continual learning about how to be a really good communicator with the people around you. To summarize this, and I appreciate it again, for having this conversation with us and with me and sharing this with the audience, because I think, I just want to be the vehicle that people can get in and learn from different folks. At the end of the day, it's this idea that we could all learn from each other. I think that communication skills are something that are not really discussed as much as I feel like they need to be discussed in business. I'm always searching of how I can communicate better. I mean, I've spent the last part of 6-7 years facilitating workshops for tech companies with cross-functional teams because I love communicating with people. How can I do that better? Anything come to mind that you feel like you want to share with this audience, and a nugget that comes to mind, or from the heart? Speak from the heart. If anybody is in a chapter behind you and you've done the thing, what do you say to those folks?
Yeah, my big thing is, as you know, Vic, personal development. I think it's an extraordinary experience to be a human being. It's a great blessing. From the time I was a child, I couldn't believe, why am I a human being? It sounds like a strange thought for a child, but I was always a little bit of a deep thinker, I suppose. My father kind of was very philosophical man and raised me in that way, but why didn't I become a sparrow or a chipmunk or a tadpole, a frog? As a kid, you're outside and you're interested in all of those things. You're much more in touch with nature as a child in many ways. You play with earthworms and you collect insects, and you say, well, why didn't I become, a ladybug? Why have I been so fortunate? And I do feel blessed and fortunate and special, like we all are, to be a human being. And so that gives you a completely different capacity for experiencing this life. We don't live like all the other little creatures. We're in possession of this incredible mind. And as you know, I've written on the mind quite a bit, and the conscious mind, subconscious, and superconscious. I feel that we're spiritual beings living in a physical body, in possession of an intellect, in possession of a mind, and having a material experience with the material world. But I believe at our essence, we're spiritual beings, and we're energy, and it's an eternal spiritual journey. And I think that introspection and self-development and personal development is absolutely fundamental to getting the most out of this thing called life. And that means studying and reading and taking the time to think. I think too much of us, we don't have time to think.
Yeah.
Don't confuse mental activity for thinking. Should I have a bologna sandwich or a ham sandwich? That's not that people see that as thinking. you need to make the space. You need to have some time to sit in the quiet and do what I call, silent, stay in silent solitude, not meditation. I'm a big believer in meditation, but that's different. That's where you try to quiet your mind. In silent solitude, I want to be able to hear my inner voice and give that voice an opportunity to be heard and reflect on that and act on that. And so I encourage everybody to read and to develop themselves in whichever direction they want, whether it's music, athletics, the arts, philosophy. It's beautiful that we have this opportunity to get better.
All right, guys, that's another short film, and episode, as they say. These days, we end these things with saying, please like, subscribe, and do all the things that make me feel really fuzzy and let that algorithm know that I'm sitting here saying hello. I look forward to seeing everybody on the next one, heading down south to talk to a couple friends, colleagues, and hopefully we'll be able to share some interesting content like we did with Dr. John Chuback. Thanks, guys.